most of the Japanese companies understand that success comes in not competing directly with the Swiss, but competing on the fringes. Do what they're not doing or find another way. The reality is that the Japanese have always been very comfortable speaking directly to consumers, whereas the luxury brands in Europe feel that luxury speaks indirectly to consumers. And it's sort of this different kind of snobbiness towards media. So the idea that you're going to go to where people are buying watches makes total sense for a Casio, for a Citizen.
Well, I recorded this intro on Wednesday, but the show wasn't recorded till Thursday, so my guess is that on this week's show we hear about Ariel's visit to the WindUp Watch Fair, and based on the law of averages of the previous 68 shows, we will hear some chat about titanium, Rolex, Ariel refusing to nominate any preferences, and there has to be at least a 50-50 chance of playing Guess the Price of the Seiko. Enjoy the show!
Greetings and welcome to this week's aBlogtoWatch Weekly. Your ears do not deceive you. It is probably Friday that you're listening to this. That's just because of stuff and things, which meant that we couldn't record on Tuesday, so we are recording on Thursday, which means this is coming to you live on Friday. So hopefully you'll forgive us for the extra day. But we are joined now by a much more awake Ariel Adams, who's been at WindUp Watch Fair and has now travelled back. Not a long distance. How long does it take you to travel from there back to home, Ariel?
Well, the flight is only about 45 minutes.
So no time for in-flight movies and the aBlogtoWatch watches?
No.
And David, you're with us this morning. How are you, sir?
Good, very well, thank you.
Good. Are you full of enthusiasm in the world of watches this morning, David?
At times I do, yes.
And David, what has been attracting your attention this week? Anything in particular?
Yeah, a friend of mine showed me this Datejust 41 that was decorated aftermarket, of course, with 1,760 diamonds set into the steel case and bracelet, and it had the rainbow bezel. Not very well done in terms of the color transition, but it's a hysterical watch. It feels good because it's a modern Datejust. It's very comfortable, but it's also blinding. And I like that contrast very much.
Great stuff. Ariel, tell us about what you were up to in the last week, because you've actually been all over the internet. You've been on Instagram. I've seen people posting photos of you from the event. Tell us what you got up to.
Yeah, so I went up north to spend some time with Chopard at an event known as the California Mille, which is an annual event sort of spun off from the Italian Mille Miglia. And it's really sort of a high-end car collector event where people bring their 1957 and previous sports cars, which are beautiful but very fragile, and they drive them for 1,000 miles, and that beats them up. So then they have to repair them, and they spend a lot of time talking about driving and breaking their cars. And watches is obviously a big part of their passions. A lot of them like watches, so it was great to spend some time with those individuals and Chopard. Then I made my way to San Francisco, where I happened to be there for WindUp, and I was really delighted to be there. I'd never actually been to a WindUp, and the event took place, really just a couple of minutes from where I started aBlogtoWatch back in 2007 when I lived in San Francisco. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, it would have been so great if there was an event like this at the time I was living there. I really believe I was part of a movement that led to this. And you asked an interesting question, sort of prior to us recording the show about, enthusiast-led shows. And it coincides with something I was thinking about when I was there. And that's essentially that without the enthusiasts, none of this would happen. The brands themselves, even if they should have rallied their forces together and cooperated to do an event like this, simply could never get around to it. It had to be the audience that did it. And it really reminded me how in America, like probably most other countries, those nations have to be responsible for the development of their own watch market. The Europeans and the Swiss and even the Japanese are not really going to be involved in market building in the way that can only be done locally. So it was great to see it happen. I think that it's a very strong thing. There's a lot of people there, a lot of brands there. Of course, these things can always be improved and added to and supplemented, but I think it shows that there's really a fervor and has to be homegrown. So it's great that a company in America that understands the community could do that. I think that, Worn and Wound has really turned into a store and this sort of events company. That's really where a lot of their focus is leading, which is great. We are media and continue to be media and an opinion, and in tandem with those events, I think that it makes a lot of sense. So I was enthused there. I thought it was really good. I was honored to be asked to speak there. And yeah, I'll probably be at another one of those events and look forward to seeing various audience members there as well.
Great stuff. And so was your feeling that it was worthwhile for all of these brands? I often wonder the extent to which the brands are going there to spread their wings and market and present their wares to the audience versus some brands that are there because they're one or two man bands or women bands and they themselves are enthusiasts. So they actually just enjoy going to places whereby they can be enthusiasts. They're almost like volunteer watch brands. You know how you get the professional car guy who'll take his shiny Mercedes, gull-wing Mercedes along to, well, actually, where else? You've just been the Mille Miglia. There's the professionals that will do it, and then there's the guys who've bought the car, or in this case, operate the watch brand, and it's just their kind of way of working in the sector of meeting the people. And so the brands are kind of divided into two. Those likes of Christopher Ward, who were there, who are big now multinational companies, and then the one or two person mom and pop, if you like, watch brands that just enjoy it. It pays their way to tour the world and meet lots of people, and they do it by selling the occasional watch.
Well, there's a market for both those types of brands at the show. I think that WindUp, it's really about strength at a price point. It doesn't really matter, what type of company produces something at that price point. Once you get into the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range, I think you sort of price yourself out of the typical purchasing comfort zone of your average WindUp attendee. At least that's sort of what I've heard and a little bit what I saw. I know that Norcane was there, for example, and they really push the limits there. They have some stuff within that, but of course they have $5,000, $6,000 watches and up for sure. And I think that it's important to say that it's really about people being comfortable at that segment. For $2,000, there's an awful lot of variety there. You could get, a high-end Casio watch. You could get a very small production, indie whatever watch. You could get sort of a look-alike, dive watch that's well made but may not be super original. I mean, there's just so much variety there, from art to conservatism, that you can get. So I really think that that's what it's about. There are, of course, other audiences that spend more on watches, sometimes much more, sometimes less. And so that's where I think the sweet spot is. It's comfort around a certain price category more than anything else. And
so was there anything in particular that caught your attention at the show in terms of brands you hadn't seen before, or watches from brands you were familiar with that took you by surprise?
Well, you have to remember that for a lot of these watch brands, this is maybe the only opportunity that consumers will be able to reliably see their products, right? Like outside of maybe accidentally seeing it on a buddy or something like that, you'll see these watches online. So the sheer fact of being able to go there is sort of like, hey, you've been seeing all these watches on the internet, now you get to see it here. The showcasing aspect, I think, is very valuable and was interesting for me. There was a lot of watches there that have been featured on aBlogtoWatch, whether through editorial or as advertising and sponsored content, and it was an opportunity for me to check it out. And a lot of it was like, wow, this is really nice. I'm so glad this was on the site. And there's a couple of other brands there, so I'd say I didn't discover too many new things there, but it was a great opportunity to see things in person. And I think for everyone who goes there, that's really the value. So when you asked about, is it worth it for the brands, they have to ask themselves, where else are people going to see my stuff? And if the answer is, this is a good opportunity, then I think it makes sense for them to be at an event like this.
Now, David, did you notice that I asked Ariel a question there about a particular watch that he liked, and he managed to answer the question without naming a single watch?
Could it be that, Ariel, you care more about industry things now than watches?
Oh dear.
No, it's a valid point. I spent a lot of time there, looking at watches while industry matters were thrust in my face. So everybody wanted me to talk about industry thing, and I really wanted to go around looking at watches a little bit. There were definitely certain things that got me excited.
Go on, name one. Name something that got you excited. An actual watch.
Well, you know, it was fun actually. I'm in the high end quartz now, right? So I was with Bradley from Autodromo,
right?
And I forget the name of the series, but he has this high end, you know, digital watch that has like a sapphire crystal, and there's a cool Cerrato case, and it's, you know, it sort of, for me, is this ideal nostalgic thing, because I grew up with these, you know, kind of blocky square digital watches in the 80s. I loved them at the time. And, you know, here's sort of this modern take on it. And I'm glad that we're seeing more of this, because I'm so sick of like modern take on the vintage 1960s, 1950s, 1970s dive watch. Modern take on it. Modern take. And I'm like, I didn't grow up with that stuff. I don't really care about the modern take. And I can agree it's beautiful. Now I get to see like weird remakes of stuff I grew up with. And I guess that means I'm getting older, but it means the industry is progressing to new eras. So those are the types of things I'm getting excited about right now.
So that would have been the Group C from Autodromo.
That's right.
You saw
there's a lot of cool watches there. I mean, look, again, you had established brands, as you said, Christopher Ward, Casio, Oris is there, the entire Citizen group, with Citizen and Bulova and Accutron, Alpina, Frederic Constant, and a lot of like just very, very small ones sort of all thrown around in kind of a fun space. You know, I think it's definitely worth it. I was happy to be there. It was a 3-day event. Do you need to go for all 3 days of a consumer? No, but I think they're doing a good job. Look, it's a lot more comfortable than half the things the brands themselves put on.
Does it say something about the Japanese watch industry that they seem to have really embraced this concept, while they're absent in large part from the watch shows in Switzerland?
Look, I think that while there is some exceptions over at Seiko, most of the Japanese companies understand that success comes in not competing directly with the Swiss, but competing on the fringes. Like, don't, do what they're not doing or find another way. The reality is that the Japanese have always been very comfortable speaking directly to consumers, whereas the luxury brands in Europe feel that luxury speaks indirectly to consumers. Like, I can't talk to a consumer, but a publication that speaks to consumers, I can speak through them. And it's sort of this different kind of snobbiness towards media. So the idea that you're going to go to where people are buying watches makes total sense for a Casio, for a Citizen. And Seiko is, I don't know, they're doing some soul searching right now, but I think they'll eventually figure out again that their strength is in being a watch brand of the people. I mean, look at the Citizen name. It's literally, supposed to be the every person watch. For them to somehow not want to be at an every person event would be silly.
Yeah, well, we might have time for a Guess the Price of the Seiko later on in the show, so let's look forward to that. David, did you pay much attention to the media coverage from the show? Have you ever been to any of these kind of shows?
Unfortunately, no. I've been to JCK and Couture a number of times, but not to these relatively smaller or newer ones in the States. I would want to go, just never been. Well,
we just need to get Ariel to take us next time, now that he seems to be a mainstay of the show, getting invited back.
Sounds good.
I was in San Francisco accidentally, but yes, you're all going to be part of the aBlogtoWatch entourage. We have to come as a small military battalion.
Yeah, I think it would be quite fun to walk in all dressed up as something.
Okay.
Something aBlogtoWatchy.
You're on uniforms, okay?
I'm on uniforms. One of the watches that seemed to stick its head up, I'm assuming it was Nodus. Were Nodus at WindUp?
Yes.
Yes. And Ripley, who had... Actually, was it Jake that had... Somebody had this watch at Geneva. And I'm realising it's Ripley that's written the review, but I thought it was Jake that had it on his wrist. So anyway, we reviewed the hands-on with the Nodus Unity ceramic bezel watch. And I think the big thing about this watch is that it's pink. And that seems to be getting all of the attention. Have they found a shade of pink that is widely acceptable to the masculine wrist? Did either of you gents get to have a look at this in the flesh when we were in Switzerland?
Yeah, I saw it. Well, not in Switzerland. I saw it at WindUp, the Nodus.
Yes, and so what did you think of it at WindUp? Was it getting this similar amount of attention?
It's a smaller watch. It's a smaller timepiece. It's not very large. I mean, every individual has to ask themselves if a color is right for them. I can't be like, this is a manly pink. Pink is hard to pull off in a watch. It can be done, and the way I think it needs to be done is the watch overall needs to be very masculine, but there needs to be certain colors on it which are pink. If the watch is not overtly masculine in shape and other respects, then it's really hard to pull off pink. And you're right, certain shades are more feminine than maybe others. I think with the Nodus is, exactly what I said to them is, make these in larger sizes so that other guys will like it as well. And, that seemed to make sense. They're definitely going for a women's watch that they don't want to call a women's watch. I think that's what unisex tends to mean these days. And I think it's successful as that. But again, I think that we're seeing a lot of color experimentation, and not all pink is created equal, not all blue, not all green, not all red, and people are starting to realize that slight changes in hue can make huge differences in appeal and demand.
Yeah, I wonder whether this shade will actually work on a larger size watch. I agree with you. For me, it's too small, but I wonder whether, in a weird way, it just becomes too pink if there's more real estate on a 40 or a 42 mil watch. I think this is something like, is this 37, this one? Or
yeah, it's something like that. I mean, look, it's a smaller size for them. They release it, and there's obviously some people are interested in that. It looks good on, I mean, look, it's just about anatomy. There's some people, you see this watch on them, you're like, that looks perfect. And then, someone like yourself will put it on and be like, that it looks small, and it is. There's no perfect watch dial color. There's no perfect size. There's just those that work better for you, and the only way you can know that is by just trying it on yourself. Yeah,
it's a 36.5 mil. David, what do we think of Nodus and this watch in particular?
I just wish it had mismatched hour and minute hands. That would spice things up a little bit, but otherwise I like it, and I like pink watches. I've never had one, but I could see myself wearing one of these. Maybe not this one, but a pink watch.
Great stuff. And I assume Nodus was a particularly popular brand at the watch fair, Ariel. Was it getting a lot of attention in general?
It doesn't really work that way. The way it was set up, there was 2 stories, and for the most part, brands had similar sized booths, and people were sort of walking around. So I wouldn't say that, one brand was getting special attention. It was equal crowd. I think that Nodus, like others, are these brands that have these, nice mixture of price point and, clean design, and it appeals to people. The Noduses of the world, the challenge is them deciding they want to keep going with it because they have to figure out exactly what they want to keep making and what the brand wants to be. I think of sort of them similar to Helios, which has been around but has not grown much in size at all. I think we have some content of one of their new watches, which is about to publish as well. So good brands, but never expect for them to get to very high production volumes. And if they do, then they fundamentally changes the brand. So, get them while they're cool. And if they're still doing cool stuff 5 years from now, consider us all very fortunate.
Great stuff. So check out Ripley's article at aBlogtoWatch.com.
2023 marks 25 years of Urwork, a brand from Baumgartner and Frey with the ambition to challenge haute horlogerie with new ideas and modern technologies, making art that tells time. 2011 brought the brand's first pocket watch, or Zeit device, the UR1001, allowing Urwork more space for horological creativity. Not only does this feature a new calendar system using the satellite complication, but under the panel on the back of the timepiece there is a 5-year oil change indicator showing when a service is due, as well as a 100-year indicator and a 1,000-year indicator registering the total running time of the movement. For more, search for Urwork at aBlogtoWatch.com or follow at Urwork Geneva on Instagram.
We had some breaking news this week. We saw him wandering the halls at Watches and Wonders, and that was Davide Cerrato. He was announced not that long ago as the CEO saviour of HYT. That didn't last terribly long for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure, but he has now been announced as the CEO of Bremont. What do we think this says about Bremont? Is this a good move? A hopeful move? A desperate move? Davide obviously comes with a reputation of, producing things that sell. At Panerai, Tudor, Mont Blanc.
The first thing that comes to mind is that this is probably the best fit he's been at since Tudor. He loves British things and design. He's Italian himself, but he's an Anglophile. From British fashion to British cars, he has a penchant for sort of this vintage tool aesthetic. If you think of the things he likes and the way he carries himself, it's it kind of makes sense, right? Like he seems like a fan of the brand. It's interesting that he's taking over as a management position versus a creative position. He is a designer himself, so the last time he was in a management role at HYT, you're correct. It didn't last that long. I don't know all the details myself, so I can't say why. And Bremont is a company that certain people last a long time, and to a degree there's high turnover. It's not like they lost a CEO. I was under the impression that the English brothers were still more or less in that position. So it's kind of news to me that they would be stepping aside to the bit, or delegating in a way that I'm not entirely familiar with. So I think that in terms of championing the brand, yeah, Davide Cerrato is a good choice, better than others. But as of right now, I'm not really sure what his mandate is, and I think none of us really understand the context around his hire.
Yeah, David, your namesake Davide, as Ariel pointed out, was well known for kind of the vintage aesthetic that came through from Tudor, Mont Blancs, going back into the history. How do you think that plays with a brand as a CEO that has no extensive history?
Yeah, I think Bremont has done pretty well at when it came to taking inspiration from the past, whether those were past planes or ships or institutions in Britain or whatever else. I think they have a vast pool of inspiration to just reach into, and I'm sure that Davide will find at least some of those that will work very well for Bremont. And yeah, some of those were a little bit cheesy, some others were very cool and very well made and charming. So we will see, but I'm not worried for them and their lack of extensive history. I'm sure they will find a way to make cool collabs.
So do we think this is just going to be the return of more Bremont watches with bits of history sitting inside them?
The problem is that that's relatively easy to do. That's my gripe. That's what my problem is with vintage watches. Just taking something that existed before and retuning it a little bit with more or less success. I would love for Bremont to refocus themselves a little bit or reintroduce some of those Martin Baker watches, the ejection seat company that we actually visited at the time. And that was super cool. And aviation and Bremont go together. And it's also a British company and one of the best actually at producing ejection seats for all kinds of aircraft. So, and have saved several thousands of lives. And it's a very cool association and a highly technical company. And I respect that. And I think it's important for all of these brands, or as many of these brands, to have at least one or two technical collections, like Breitling with the professional line and specifically the emergency and stuff like that. I think it's not supposed to be all cheesy and vintagey and inspired. There should be at least some sort of a technical association as well.
I want to add one more thing here. Davide, as a creative director, is really good at creating certain collections and consolidating design. And as David was saying, what he did, I was sort of reminded that some of the best designs from Bremont, at least to my knowledge, are somewhat in the past, not too recent. A lot of the recent stuff, good themes, good stories, but I'm not seeing a lot of originality. There seems to be certain rehashing of things that they designed a while ago, and some of the new things don't seem as inspired to me. So if Davide can come aboard and refocus the aesthetic part of the brand to doing what I know they're able to do, then it can help them get their models back to these pillars, right? Because they sort of lost some of the pillars, or it's become a little bit wishy-washy. What exactly each collection is supposed to be under. So I think that's something that he can do particularly well, and I think that it can marry some of the wonderful design language that they're capable of with the good stories and technical stuff that we've been mentioning that Bremont is good at.
Yeah, it feels to me like Bremont have somewhat gone off the boil. I'm not sure that the Supernova has really worked for them the way that they thought it might, getting into the integrated bracelet. You compare their launch of the Supernova to what Christopher Ward have done in the last week. And okay, different price points, but you can see how one has really caught the attention of people and is being compared to watches that are 10 times the price, whereas the Bremont still seems to be sitting in the isn't this rather expensive for a watch category. Whereas, as David says, going back to the Martin Baker stuff, the Boeing stuff, the triptych cases, I think is just where Bremont shines. They are incredibly high quality watches in terms of how they're put together and made. There's debates over the kind of movements they're using perhaps and the price they're charging for them, but the actual stuff that surrounds the movement is really well done in my experience from having one of these Boeing watches in the hand. So it will be interesting to see where Davide goes first. Where do you think would be, if you were taking over as CEO, Ariel, of Bremont, what would be the first thing you'd be asking your new minions to look at?
I would, do the cliche thing, but take it back to the first few years of the brand. What were the first model collections they came out with? What were those particular, collaborations that put them on the map? David mentioned Martin Baker, which is a perfect example. And how can they make those good again? Right? The Supermarine, one of my favorites.
Yeah.
The debut collection, I think, has not been topped. They've tried to make him bigger. They've tried to change the dials. They've tried to make him smaller. They've tried to add complications. And to me, nothing has outdone the very first one. So I would try to make good versions of all their classics and then build upon that. So a lot of it is taking the things they have right now and tweaking them to consolidate it and make good collections. The Alt 1P is an amazing collection. Doesn't really have any problems behind it, but it's really an aging platform. There's not too much which is done other than some dial tweaks and things like that, and people demand some changes. I mean, you have a lot of these luxury brands that are using some of the same cases and architecture for 10, 15 years now, and I just think consumers, similar to cars, are going to expect a generational change more often than that. So I think there's just a lot of areas where they can change things. Now, they have limited budgets, and I know that they're trying to maintain a high level of enterprise value, so they can't spend too much. So it's really difficult to know what Davide will choose to do. But I guess that's why the English brothers hired him, because they feel that he has an ability to do something like that. And this is a very different challenge from HYT. So whatever did or didn't go well at HYT, I'm not sure if that's going to be particular telling for what's going to happen at Bremont, provided the financial powers that be let him spend some money, which he needs to do his job. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see what Davide's attitude is to, Bremont spent a number of years in the wilderness trying to build their own movement, eventually to pivot to the movement suppliers from Orage. It'll be interesting to see what Davide's kind of theory as to whether it's important to have your own identifiable watch movement versus just using Solita or ETA or whatever. It'll be interesting to see what he brings to that particular debate. David, you have written a comparison between the previous version of the Rolex Daytona, the 116-500 LN, and the new one just released at Watches and Wonders. If you had however many tens of thousands of imaginary dollars, which one would you buy?
Well, I would still go for the old one, and that's what this article is basically about. I mean, most of it is very objective comparison, and then the final chapter is a subjective take on all these changes. And basically, in a nutshell, what I would say is that, in my opinion, if the order of these watches and the way that they were launched was reversed and the previous one came after this new one, I think we would be saying that they have refined it. And that does not apply in the way that now they have done it. The lugs are thicker, and the whole watch is a millimeter larger, and it looks chunkier and bigger and a little bit more ungainly. The monoblock Cerrato bezel is now framed, or it has a metal frame around it, so you lose this sensation of having a chunky monoblock bezel, and it looks like an insert now, and just the proportions all over are just kind of wrong to my eyes, at least. So I don't think they've done something for the sake of doing it because they had to, because it was the 60th anniversary of the Daytona. But I don't think that it's an improved design. It's a change to modified design. But I see in the comments that many people prefer the new one, and so I guess it's the waiting lists are not getting any shorter. That's for sure.
So, I mean, one of the most identifiable things, I think, is the change to the chronograph surrounds. The black surrounds have gone from being which way around, thicker to thinner or thinner to thicker?
They were thicker and now they are thinner, so they are hollowed out on the inside a little bit.
And I think that's the most noticeable thing when you get close to it. And the proportions, I think that does, it just makes it seem, actually makes me feel that the watch looks like it's more got, Munch's scream on the face. It frames these chronograph counters in a very different way, despite the fact that it's probably like, I don't know, is it a half a millimeter difference? I don't even know how big a difference it would be between the two, but it just shows you how big a change in what something looks like such a small detail can make, because it's absolutely minuscule, but it really does it makes the watch look like an uncanny thing in a weird way. Difficult to explain without seeing it. Have a look at the article. David's has put together a kind of exchanged shot of the face that flips between the two, so you can obviously see the differences.
Yeah, or GIF, or however you want to call it. Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because the dial size and the dial opening remains the same size, but they did have to modify a little bit around the dial's proportions because the case got so much bigger and the lugs are so much wider and longer. So you can't have the tiny little dial in the middle of it when you have a bigger case. And when I first saw it, and I remember we were having our meeting with Rolex, and they asked our impressions on this, and I told them my first impression was that of a chronograph from like 10 or 15 years ago when the big watch trend was at its peak and movements were still small. And designers had to find all kinds of ways to make this squished together little subdials look somehow bigger in a chunky case so that it would fill the whole thing up a little bit better. And strangely, and probably unconscious of this trend from 10 years ago, Rolex designers appear to have resorted to the exact same solution, which is just make them thinner and make the subdials look bigger, even though they are actually not, because obviously they can't be that much bigger, because otherwise they will start to touch in the middle. So you can't have oval shaped subdials either. So anyway, it's just changed proportions, and I don't think it's for the better. That's all.
And although it's only the platinum one that has the clear case back, do you think that we will see this working its way down to the next generations of Daytonas? Is this the sort of thing? Well, we know this is the sort of thing that Rolex do. They release something different in their most precious metal versions, and then a year or two later, they reach down. And my impression of Rolex is they're speeding things up. So you got the titanium Deeper Sea, or whatever it's called, and then within a few months, you got the titanium Sea Dweller. Yachtmaster. The titanium Yachtmaster. Do you think we will see the clear case back coming faster into the rest of the range? Or is that just a one and done?
Definitely. I've heard about some supply chain issues, guess what, on titanium from somewhere. And apparently it's not going to be in the stores, not even for many, many months, maybe probably even longer. The Yachtmaster 42 will be in extremely low supply because Rolex is still figuring stuff out with titanium, which is kind of funny to hear, but at least that's what I heard.
I mean, do you think they just don't want to be seen to be going next door to Tudor and asking them how they do it on the Pelagos?
Technically, their own employees, no.
Exactly. So can we just transfer the people that are cutting this out at Tudor?
Isn't that a funny dynamic? Like, no, we have to do it differently. We just have to. We experimented it. We know we can do it, so now we have to do it differently because we are charging 4 times as much, literally. Because it's like a $14,000, $16,000 watch there.
Yeah.
42. It's way too expensive, I think. So yeah, to answer your question, see-through casebacks are definitely coming because Rolex has prettied up the 4130. It's a 4131 now. With some, uncharacteristic for Rolex, really pretty movement finishing, some Côte de Genève, open work rotor, even some fake gold chatons that frame the jewels. So it's a pretty movement now, and there would be, it would make sense to show it. And also the Sky Dweller movement under the radar, that's been updated to the 9002 movement, if I remember correctly, and that also has these new movement finishings. So It's happening, but we will see whether that will be complemented with see-through case backs. But I think there's a good chance that we will see more of these in the next few years.
And there's not a Sky Dweller with a clear case back, though that would seem to make sense because it's presumably quite a complicated movement if you were able to look through the back of it.
Yeah, well, most of it will be on the dial side, so it's
true.
Yeah, but still, it's a good looking movement. And also, I just wanted to add that you guys can totally buy an aftermarket see-through case back online from Germany or wherever for like €200, and then you can put it on your watch. Just make sure you don't bring it in to the Rolex service center with that on, because it voids your warranty or whatever. They can refuse to service it. So make sure you switch it back. But there are some nice, decent quality case backs, see-through case backs that you can buy and have a watchmaker, but not Rolex watchmaker, put it on your watch.
So if you want to buy your Rolex slowly in parts, then you can start by just buying the case back and then see how long it takes to actually get the watch to match. If you missed last week's Spending Time podcast, then this is what you missed.
Naming watches is always both the greatest fun and the greatest difficulty. The dodecagon spoke to us. The 12 just sort of leapt off the page in a sense. And it's also got a kind of a secret society twist to it. So yeah, I mean, you two can become a disciple. It's a distinctive name, and it's again, people seem to like it. The dodecagon won in the end, and just seemed right. So it's the 12 in stainless steel and the 12 Ti in titanium.
They're running around saying Kevin all the time. Is it Kevin?
Who's like Bubble and things like that.
Yeah, please do more impressions of Minions. I just feel like that's the future.
I don't know much.
Oh my days! So this was actually reviewed by Ariel. So this is the sort of beginning of how you were heartbroken by Ariel. Yeah.
But I have decided to go with this. You know what sold it for me? One, it's yellow, so it can be on the list. And also, you can get a strap that's like a denim strap. It feels like they're talking to me. It's so cute.
Does it make noises though? It feels like in order to be a Minion watch, someone should be able to press a button and someone goes, Kevin. Or
Bubble?
I mean, what's the point in having a Minion anything if it's not making noises?
Yeah, it should be like a Build-A-Bear situation where you've got like, you just, like it has a button that says like push me and then it makes noises. Bye-bye, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye.
Like, I just want a Minion in my life as a friend.
Doesn't everybody?
And this is really the only way that I can get one. And I could just like look down.
Well, I was going to say, as long as it's not the one that likes trying to push you off things.
They only fight with each other. Or if you're like an evil person, and I wouldn't be evil. I would be their friend. I would be their Gru.
Oh.
And instead of going to steal the moon, we're going to steal a moon's watch.
So good.
Don't tell anyone. Yeah, David, you're going on about the films you want to be part of. I'm making my own Despicable Me.
What's new is we have one brand that's participating with a massive, massive exhibition, and they're first-time participants. So that would be something new, and it's the first time that Dubai Watch Week gives that size of space to any brand.
So if you don't want to miss out again, then subscribe to the Spending Time podcast now on your favourite podcast player. Now, one other brand that they could go to learn how to deal with titanium, we dealt with it a little bit last time, but it's now out and about, is Christopher Ward and the titanium version of their new The 12. Ariel, now that it's all out and about, what's your thoughts on this watch now that you can actually describe it properly?
Yeah, so the 12 is a really nice creation from Christopher Ward. I don't think that anyone knew exactly what they would do. Obviously, it has similarities to other things on the market. There's a steel version and a titanium version, which I think is the most confusing thing because they are actually different cases with different movements. The titanium one is thinner and has a better movement, so it's hard for me to say, look at the steel one as an enthusiast when the titanium one exists. I think that's really the one to look at. The steel one seems to be maybe for the price point or for a different audience that may not know the difference between titanium and steel. But again, the titanium one, that's the sweet spot. I've been wearing it and I like it. I think the dials are nice looking. No one's going to love everything. You can accuse Christopher Ward of not being that original in certain departments. But again, quality, price point, and comfort, it scores high in all those areas.
Good stuff. David, what was your first impressions now that you've seen this take to the internet?
Well, it does look remarkably like the trip bag, but you know, it's not like Chapek invented this thing. They've had inspirations from here and there. It's a big segment. It's basically now everyone launching two-door coupes. You know, it's the style. It's or SUVs or whatever you want to call them. It's you know, not one single brand or 4 or 5 can own this look. And sure, sooner or later, there are, you know, bound to be some overlaps. And, you know, I should say, your quality and your design should not be that easy to copy. And I'm not saying this to Chapek, I'm also saying this to all others. So there's competition, and it's good for us. It's good to see. And I'm looking forward to seeing this hands-on.
Excellent. Well, go and check out the article online, and there's an interview with Mike France there as well. Okay, we're not going to review the watch, we're just going to review the price. Seiko unveils the Presage Sharp Edge Series SPB 415 and SPB 417. This is a Presage case. It has the 6R5J automatic movement, 72 hours of power reserve, steel. Ariel, guess the price of the Seiko.
I remember when these were basically under 1,000, and I do not think this is under 1,000. This is not their fanciest movement. What's the dial again?
The dial is a kind of open-worked, open-heart dial, a bit of kind of... It looks actually a bit like the Christopher Ward dial. You know, these Terry Pratchett all ideas just have a way of working out at the same time in different locations. So
I don't know. $1,800?
$1,800 from Ariel.
I have
David.
like a formula. It's like a certain number in my mind, like plus a certain percentage.
Yeah.
David, give us a price before we go.
$895. I will be kind to say this time. I think it's,
like under 1,000, like 895.
Yeah. Okay,
well,
okay,
all right.
inflation, but whatever.
That'd be great.
Well,
the
answer, just to disappoint everybody, is $1,200. So Ariel's disappointed because it's not expensive enough, and David's disappointed because it's too expensive.
No,
so
it's $895 plus inflation. That's what it is. Okay.
Great stuff. Well, go and check out the article on that watch if the new stuff from Seiko interests you. That's it from us this week. David, where can people find you on the internet?
It's aBTW_David on Instagram and on aBlogtoWatch.com.
Excellent. And Ariel, where can people find you on the internet?
Ariel the Watch on Instagram, and all my stuff on aBlogtoWatch.com.
Excellent. And you can find me at Rick TikTok, and you can email the show podcast at aBlogtoWatch.com. We'd really like to hear from you. So send us in a voicemail, send us in some thoughts, and we'll give it some coverage in the show. Have a great week. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.